time. So before starting the presentation, I give some small hints. If you have connection problems, please let us know, type in the chat, send us an email. We will try to help. The presentation is best viewed on PC. It doesn't work, I think, on a mobile phone. But we are live also on Facebook right now. So if you have a connection problem, you don't get the software or whatever, you can go to Facebook and Neurofeedback Luxembourg, and you will see the same thing. Then if you are connected here. There will be on the upper screen, you see the presentations. On the right screen down, you have the possibilities to make a chat, to make comments, to ask questions. Someone from the team from Neurofeedback Luxembourg will collect the questions, and we will answer them at the end. So just to be sure that everything is working fine, please give me a sign of life in the chat that you are there and that you hear us and that the video is there. Give us some feedback. Great, first one. Okay, great. So we got confirmation. So I think we can then go into the event. So again, welcome to everyone for joining us. Today is a really special webinar because we have a guest speaker, and it's someone I never met in person, but we know each other quite well because we stayed in contact over virtual communities and sharing the same interest, the same passion about neurofeedback and neurotechnologies. So welcome, Santiago.
Hello, Francois. Thank you. Thank you. How are you?
So what is on the menu today? Quite a lot. First, I will just small add. I will repeat who we are, what we are doing, and then the Santiago brand is doing the main part of the presentation. At the end, we have something special to offer all the sports people or the performance interested people. We will offer you something, and then your questions or answers, as usual. So, who are we? Yeah, we are a small neurofeedback practice in Luxembourg. We exist since 2014. We are actually 4 people, myself, Nadia, neurobiologist, biologists, Melanie and Iman, who are neuropsychologists. What do we do? This is our center where we work several things. There's also Chinese medicine, medical cannabis, interesting things. The center is specialized in stress, pain, and addiction. So cover a lot. So mainly we work clinically. So what we offer is neurotherapy, analyzing the brain, brain mapping. Santiago will explain a little bit more how he does it. He does a different way than we do it. We do train the brain, we stimulate the brain, and we have also cognitive testing and cognitive training, which are our standard offer. For who? But mostly today we work in more in the clinical field. So it's for children with ADHD, special needs like autism, lots of adult stress, burnout, depression, anxiety. But also we work with seniors trying to keep their brain fit. And then the last part, which, to be honest, we don't have so much experience. I trained a few sports people, but Luxembourg is a small country. We don't have so much Olympic sports people, and I didn't meet enough. I had one fencer, which I trained, but then she moved to another country, so Luxembourg will not have, I couldn't work further with that. So this is for our part. But now I hand over to Santiago Brandt, who is live with us from Colombia. Maybe you can, introduce yourself a little bit. You can either move the presentation with the arrows down, or I can move them for you as you like. I take off my video, and yeah, enjoy the show, and the floor is yours, Santiago.
Well, thank you, and thanks for to Neurofeedback for the invitation. And if that's okay with you, to move the slides if you don't mind. And with that in mind, I want to say good afternoon from Colombia, good evening, good morning to everyone around the world, wherever you're seeing us. It's my absolute pleasure to be here presenting this webinar on feedback, sports performance for everyone who's attending here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off my camera because that's going to save some bandwidth. We'll use the bandwidth with the voice. I don't want to lose a good connection. So I'm going to go ahead and turn my camera off, but you can still hear me. And I am Santiago Brand. I'm from Bogota, Colombia. And I have been doing feedback for the past 12 years in clinical psychology and 12 years with performance, and I have 6 years of experience in sports psychology. I have been working with athletes for over 16 years using traditional sports psychology as well as neurofeedback, brainmapping, brain spotting, and other interesting techniques. And today I want to talk specifically about how I have used neurofeedback and biofeedback for sports. And more than talking about specific techniques, we're going to talk about why neurofeedback and why biofeedback are such good evidence-based interventions for performance athletes. And we may focus today on peak performance athletes, Olympic athletes, world-class athletes, but this is something that you can train athletes from early ages and amateurs, those performers who are not necessarily Olympic or elite level athletes, but who want to optimize their performance. And as I said, I worked with the Center for Biomedical Sports Sciences, which was back in 2004 when I started doing sports psychology. And from there, I moved to the United States to learn neurofeedback, and I worked for a while in the United States near Orlando, Florida. Came back to Colombia, and I worked for the Ministry of Sports, which was called Deportes, and now called the Ministry of Sports. And I had the chance to help establish the neuroscience lab for peak performance and elite sports. And as I said, I have used some classical sports psychology techniques and interventions such as goal setting and psychometric testing, and I've used imagery or visualization, relaxation techniques, and interventions in groups and team sports. So I have had some experience using that. And then when I discovered neurofeedback back in 2007, I made the transition into incorporating more neuroscience for sports. Next, please.
Okay.
Thank you. So I want to start by talking, and it's going to about why neurofeedback and why biofeedback. These are techniques that have been in existence for more than 30 years, and they are evidence-based, and there's publications, not only books, but journal publications that attest to the power and the benefits that that they can bring to the clinical world, or they can bring to peak performance, not only sports, but also other kinds of performance. So you're going to see throughout the presentation, we're going to provide some evidence of that. And the reason I use them is because they're evidence-based, and they have worked in the past, and they continue to work, and they will continue to work in the future as we do more research and we do more publications. And I want to start by mentioning some books that exist out there that have been written by professionals who have wide experience in implementing these techniques with athletes. One on the left is called Biofeedback and Neurofeedback Application in Sports Psychology. And there's Michael Linton and Vieta Sue Wilson, who are world-renowned sports psychologists from the US, from Canada, and from Europe, who have compiled their experience into this book. And they talk about what sorts of neurofeedback and biofeedback interventions work best with athletes in the many years of experience that they have. To the right, there's a book by Roland Karlstedt out of New York City, who's the president of the American Board of Sports Psychology and who has written extensively on neurofeedback and biofeedback, and specifically on heart rate variability as a conduit to optimizing performance in sports and elite athletes. Next, please. And these books, by the way, if you search them, you can find them on Amazon, or if you do a Google search for the titles, you can find places on the internet where you can buy them. Dr. Karlstedt has also written Evidence-Based Applied Sports Psychology, which is a tremendously useful and informational book on how to use neuroscience and biofeedback interventions, which are evidence-based with athletes of different sports modalities. And he is mainly done some work in heart rate deceleration with heart rate variability as one of the main interventions that he utilizes to optimize sports performance. And he also emphasizes using neurofeedback and biofeedback in critical moments during competition. One of the things that we do when we train neurofeedback and biofeedback is that we train the athlete to be particularly prepared for critical moments during competition, for those crunch moments where performance really counts. We train the self-regulation, that we train the athlete's brain, the athlete's mind, and the athlete's body to be prepared for such moments. When you have a penalty kick in a soccer game, or you have a free throw in basketball, or you have that putt in golf that's decisive to win the Masters or the US Open or to qualify into the European Tour, or to qualify into the PGA Tour, or to win that scholarship at college. We particularly want to train the client for those moments. And this is where neurofeedback and biofeedback become very useful for athletes, because there are critical moments during competition where the athlete can get dysregulated and their performance can go south because their body gets dysregulated. And we, with the technology, we implemented to train that regulation, to achieve that regulation, and that's how we achieve. That's one of the different ways we can achieve it. Next, please. Now, I also want to talk about places that already implement neurofeedback, where neurofeedback and biofeedback are part of the plethora of interventions, of the variety of interventions they use with athletes. The United States Olympic Committee does implement neurofeedback, and I know it because I know two of the lead sports psychologists there. They have been to numerous trainings with me and numerous conferences with me. So I know firsthand that they do implement neurofeedback and biofeedback. I know for a fact that the Canadian Olympic Committee does train their athletes with neurofeedback and biofeedback. Vieta Sue Wilson and other Canadian sports psychologists have gone around the world training, world-renowned athletes and training other sports psychologists in these techniques. Coldeportes, as I said, is now the Ministry of Sports in Colombia, and I was part of the program between 2014 and 2016. They hired me to help them set up and get the neuroscience and neurofeedback sports laboratory started. So I was there for 2 years doing QEEG brain mapping, stress profiles, and neurofeedback intervention for the athletes that represent Colombia in the Olympic Games and World Championships in different disciplines. And at the bottom, we have the Guatemalan Olympic Committee, whom I've had the chance to train. I was hired in 2000 2017 and 2018 to go there to Guatemala and train their sports psychologists and their doctors and their nutritionists in biofeedback and neurofeedback techniques. So Guatemala has been implementing these techniques for the past 2 or 3 years, and the Bolivian Football Federation is the only football federation in Latin America to have a neurofeedback program. And I had a chance to be there last year training their sports psychologists. So these are places that that I know for a fact, because I either know their sports psychologists or I have trained them directly, use biofeedback and neurofeedback as interventions. And so it speaks volumes to the importance of what biofeedback and neurofeedback can do for athletes, and to the importance that such elite organizations are giving to evidence-based, technology-based techniques to train with athletes. So if you're a sports psychologist interested in implementing techniques or learning more about them, if you are an athlete who's looking for ways of improving your performance, or if you work with sports in one way or the other, and know the places implement these interventions. Next, please. Also, the Aspire Academy in Qatar has started implementing neurofeedback and biofeedback as their interventions. And Qatar, as all of you or some of you may know, will be hosting the next soccer or football World Cup in 2022. And Aspire, it's a huge academy with a lot of projection, and they have started developing their football programs and have made neurofeedback biofeedback available from early age. So they're not only using it for the professional elite athletes, they're also using neurofeedback and biofeedback with youth athletes as preparation for their future programs. And these are the athletes who are going to represent Qatar in the national team, in not only in 2022, but in the future, in the years to come. And they're using a system similar to the one the Italian football team used in 2006 when they won the World Cup in Germany, called the Mind Room. And the Mind Room was a special setup that they had where they trained the Italian soccer team members with neurofeedback. And that's part of the one of the elements that contributed to Italy being able to win the World Cup that year. And the AC Milan in Italy adopted the same system. It is my understanding that Chelsea in England and other football teams around the world have implemented a similar setup as the one they did with the Mind Room. So we have more professional organizations who have won several tournaments, not only locally but internationally, adopting neurofeedback and biofeedback to help their athletes optimize their performance. Next, please.
Yeah, the Mind Room is quite famous. I think it's a legend, but is there really known what everything they did in this famous Mind Room?
I don't think that they have really talked about about the protocols that they have used. I know the people who helped set it up, but understandably so, they're somewhat secretive about the recipe for success. I know they had several systems with several special chairs and screens. As far as the exact protocols, I don't think it's known. I don't think they have revealed that information. And again, it's a trademark secret that they use. Now, we also have Bryson Dechambau. He's a professional golf player, and he's ranked number 11 in the world right now. He's part of the top 20 best players in the world right now. And he has openly talked about how he uses neuro to train his brain. If you go to YouTube or Google and you Google or search for Bryson Dechambau neurofeedback, you will find videos where he talks about how he trains his brain with neurofeedback and how it has contributed to his success. what I'm doing right now here with you all is sharing important information, is sharing athletes who are at the top of their game, who are currently at the top of their game, who are using neurofeedback and biofeedback as part of their training. And Bryson Dechambau is known as the professor in the PGA Tour. And they call him the professor because he is a very science-oriented player. He is all about evidence-based interventions for his golf game. And he won a tournament 2 weeks ago, and he's in contention to win again this weekend. So he is a very industrious player and very, very studious of how he can opt performance. And he is implementing Neurofeedback now. Next, please. And here we have a picture from the official site of the PGA Tour, Tour. And this is an article they wrote a few months ago about how Bryson trains his brain. And the article mentions neurofeedback, and they mention how they did a brain map, a QEEG brain map on him, and how he trains it. So we are looking at top sports people, top sports organizations that are openly talking about neurofeedback and biofeedback more and more. And this is not a new age thing. This is not, an up and coming and passing fashion element. This is something that's here to stay. And the more we research it, the better we get at it. And now, fortunately, we have top athletes around the world embracing it and using it to their benefit. Next, please. Now, there's also, if you go to YouTube, you can also find videos where he talks about it. And this is Mysty Treinor. She is a 3-time gold medalist in beach volleyball. And she also has openly spoken about the use of neurofeedback for her mental training. So we have somebody who is a 3-time Olympic gold medalist in beach volleyball talking about neurofeedback. And again, this is going to speak volumes about why neurofeedback is becoming more and more mainstream with top athletes around the world. And this is an article from the Wall Street Journal. Unfortunately, I cannot download it because you need a subscription to the Wall Street Journal. But if you search for this heading on Google, you will find that this is a real article that talks about a real person using neurofeedback as part of her training regime. I don't know if her partner used neurofeedback as well. I couldn't find anything on her, but I know Mysty Treinor has talked about it in the past. And I think she's retired now. But again, 3-time Olympic gold medalist. It's good support for what we do with these techniques. Next, please. And here's Chris Kaman. It's a former German NBA player, and this is from a few years ago. And the heading, as it reads, it says Chris Kaman uses neurofeedback. And this is, if you go to YouTube and type those exact words in the search box, you're going to find a video. And they interview the player, they interview him, and they interview the person who provides neurofeedback for him and how it contributed to his success in the NBA. So again, we have a professional golfer, we have a 3-time gold medalist with beach volleyball, and now we have a basketball player with the NBA, which is the top league around the world, talking about how they use neurofeedback. Next, please. And here's another picture taken from this YouTube page, golf channel Neurofeedback Neurologics. So this is actually, they're interviewing the person who trains Bryson Dechambau, the golf player, and how they are doing neurofeedback with him. And the video starts with an interview with Bryson talking about how he does neurofeedback. And he talks about brain waves and frequencies and brain mapping. So we have, again, an elite athlete endorsing these kinds of techniques, these kinds of interventions. And if you go to the next one, please, you will have another snippet of the same channel. And here they show the brainwave activity of the player's EEG. And so we have somebody in the Orlando area. Orlando is the golf capital of the world, Orlando, Florida, in the United States. and most or many of the PGA Tour players live in the area and train there. And this is from the person who does neurofeedback with them, and he goes on and explains the process. And they have some journalists from the Golf Channel interviewing him and doing neurofeedback themselves to understand it. So we have Golf Channel, which is a major sports network. We have ESPN, which is another major sports network, talking about neurofeedback and biofeedback. Again, this is becoming more and more mainstream, more and more embraced by athletes and coaches around the world. Next, please. And we also have a video in YouTube of some research being done when they're using neurofeedback in croquet. So notice how there's different modalities, different disciplines that are adopting neurofeedback. We have croquet, we have golf, we have basketball, we have beach volleyball. So this is not specific to one sport. This is not specific to one type of athlete. It goes across all genders and all sports disciplines. So we have a university in the UK doing specific research on why neurofeedback works so efficiently. So this is not something that somebody's doing in a lab just because. This is something that's being researched and being formally researched and published and talked about. Next, please. And if you go to a Google Scholar search for neurofeedback in sports, we have about 4,510 results. So this goes to show that this is being researched. This is being researched and is being published. Now, not all of them are going to be published in top journals, and that's something we're working on to strengthen. But you'll see that there are at least 4,500 publications on the subject. So this is something that people are interested in, and they are working on providing the science and showing the science behind it. This is not a casual thing. This is something that's researched and has scientific evidence to support it. Next, please. And the same thing, if you do a search for biofeedback in sport, have about 17,600 results if you do a Google Scholar search. So 17,600 different articles about biofeedback and sports. And these articles talk about different biofeedback modalities, such as heart rate variability, electromyography, galvanic skin response or skin conductance, and peripheral temperature. The most researched modality in biofeedback for sports is heart rate variability, and you will find a lot of information on it. It's the most widely researched modality. So if you do a search for heart rate variability, HRV, in sports, there will be no shortage of information. Next, please. So this is a search that's specific for HRV, heart rate variability. Is about 15,200 results. So again, no shortage of information in terms of biofeedback, neurofeedback, and specific modalities for peak performance. Next, please. Now, as I said, I worked at the Center for Sports Sciences in Colombia, and I had the chance to be there between 2014 and 2016 as the director and developer of the neuroscience lab. And we had a chance to implement brain mapping and neurofeedback and biofeedback with several elite athletes, some of them Olympic medalists. And we had a chance to introduce this into Colombia. And luckily, after that, the interest has grown more and more. And I've had the privilege to be hired in different places in Latin America to go around and lecture about my work in biofeedback with sports, and also train professionals and organizations who are interested in implementing this into either the Olympic Committee or local leagues or local clubs. Next, please. So what are biofeedback and neurofeedback? Some people like to call them therapy. If you're more in the clinical work world, the word therapy is mostly used for it. But in reality, neurofeedback and biofeedback are training techniques. And you're training things such as self-regulation, You are optimizing performance, your flexibilization of the central nervous system for the athlete to learn new things. And obviously, you're training for critical moments during competition. And what you're doing is you're training the athlete's ability to self-regulate and optimize their performance, how to better handle anxiety, how to better manage their stress, how to better perform under pressure. So if you come from more from a clinical background, if you work with depression, if you work with anxiety, if you work with personality disorders and anything that has to work mostly with the clinical world, you're going to call it a therapy. I like to call it a training, regardless of whether I'm doing clinical work or peak performance related work. And I call it training precisely because we're training abilities and skills, and we're training new ways for the athlete to perform better, specifically during critical moments. Next, please. Now, when we train with biofeedback and neurofeedback, we're training what we call the optimal zone of the individual zone of optimal functioning, meaning that each and every one of us, each and every athlete out there has an area where they perform better. And we look at arousal or activation. Some athletes will perform better when the stakes are high, and some athletes will perform better when they don't have a lot of anxiety. And most of us will perform in the middle where you see the optimum, the arrow pointing down for optimum, meaning that's the set point for peak performance. And what we do with neurofeedback and biofeedback is take the athlete to the side of the table, to the side of that curve where they perform better. If we have an athlete who doesn't perform when they're too anxious, where their arousal is too high, then we bring the arousal down by training their heart rate, the brain waves, their temperature, and we bring them to the optimal zone of function. Same as if we have an athlete whose arousal is really low and they're not performing well, where we can optimize that arousal to bring them to that optimal point where they perform at their best. So we're utilizing this inverted U, which is widely used in sports psychology. And what we're doing is, again, bringing the athlete's arousal, training the athlete to find that arousal area where their performance is going to be more optimal. Next, please. And neurofeedback has to do with clinical work. David Grant, who works with a technical brain spotting, postulates that if you are a sports psychologist, but you don't have the skill set to do therapy or clinical work, you are deficient. And I tend to partially agree, mostly 90% agree with this statement. I think that as a sports psychologist, you're going to need to know some clinical aspects, because after all, athletes are people too. Yes, they have a talent. Yes, they have skills that we don't possess, but they also are human beings who are vulnerable to anxiety, stress, depression, or sleep difficulties. Next, please. And to show you that, I want to mention some examples of that. We have on the left, Robert Enke, who was 32 years old. He was the goalkeeper for the German national football team. And he was suffering from depression after losing his little girl to leukemia. He could not deal with the trauma and the bereavement and ended up jumping in front of a train and committing suicide at the age of 32. To the right, we have Mirko Sadic, who was a player for San Lorenzo in Argentina. And at the age of 21, he hung himself from a beam in his home. So these are two clear examples that athletes who are at the top of their game can also suffer from mental illness, and we need to have the skills to help them heal. And if we don't have the skills, we need to refer to somebody who can help them out. Next, please. Now, there are also very known cases. We have Michael Phelps, who has won, I think, 7 gold medals. He's the swimmer with the most gold medals in the history of the United States and the sport. And he has openly talked about his ADHD diagnosis, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And he recently penned a letter. He wrote a letter for the media talking about his struggles with confinement and depression during confinement during the COVID situation. So he wrote this letter about 3-4 months ago, and it became widely known. John Daly to the right in the orange pants and shirt. He's a pro golfer who's played for many years. He's very well known in the golf world, and he's talked about his struggles with bipolar disorder and alcohol addiction. So I'm mentioning these cases because these are cases that have been openly talked about in the media, and the athletes have openly talked about it. And most recently, Tiger Woods with his addiction to sex and his addiction to certain substances. And it's been spoken about as well. So, we have 3 top athletes who are very famous, who are very good at what they do, yet they have their own personal struggles. And I think that with biofeedback, neurofeedback, and the proper skills, a professional can help them overcome and thrive even more in their sport. Next, please.
So basically, you're saying that even these super performers have mental health issues, and that everyone can be touched. This is a form of a taboo, which is often not discussed in public.
That is correct. We think of athletes as being immune to the effects of mental illness, and that couldn't be further from the truth. Athletes do also suffer from a lot of anxiety. Athletes do also have sleep difficulties. Athletes do get depressed, and athletes do commit suicide, as we've seen. And so we need to look at the athlete more as a person than a performance machine. We tend to get mesmerized and be in awe of their skills and their performance, and we tend to live vicariously through them. But it's important that we understand that they're just as human as you and I. And with these kinds of interventions, we can we can help more in a more profound way, in a more profound manner, and a more specific manner. Now, this is from last year, and this is an Austrian triathlete who was kidnapped. She was kidnapped while she was training in Austria or in Austria, yeah. So she was doing her training, and this guy pulled over in her car, ran her over, knocked her out, and kidnapped her. And she woke up being tied to a chair in his house, and he had intended to rape her and kill her. Now, this is rare, but even though she's a top athlete, we're talking about very traumatic experience. Now, she convinced him she talked him into letting her go. He was eventually arrested, but if she hadn't done that, if she hadn't been skillful enough to talk herself out of the situation, she wouldn't be here today. And even though this is strange, we recently talked about the sexual abuse situation with the U.S. gymnastics teams and Dr. Nazar, and this is becoming more widely known. So athletes will suffer from severe trauma that needs to be addressed in a more clinical way. And again, we can do the same while using neurofeedback and biofeedback, as well as our therapeutic skills. Next, please. So athletes will also receive physical trauma, and injuries are the number one fear for every athlete. If you do a survey or a poll on professional athletes, their number one fear is to get an injury, and specifically an injury that could be career ending. So athletes are fearful in the back of their heads that they might get injured and that the injury could be the end of their careers. And that also constitutes as a form of assault into the central nervous system and a form of assault into their performance and their psyche that needs to be addressed. And fortunately, with the technology that we use, we can get a window into the athlete's mind and body, and we can provide them with useful interventions that can be successful. When I was working in the Ministry of Sports, the physical therapists would come and ask for my help because they noticed that the athletes would get injured. They would successfully recover from a physical perspective, but they were not successfully recovering from the psychological perspective. So when an athlete gets injured, it will create there will be a fingerprint of that in the athlete's brain and mind. And we cannot access it by observation only, and we cannot access it only by interviewing the athlete. We need specific technology that can do that. And with brain mapping, for instance, we can look at the athlete's brainwave pattern, which will show us where the problem lies. And then we can go target that program directly and treat the problem from the root cause, and then we can move on and successfully optimize performance or heal. Next, please.
May I join just in on that? Because I think there is a word which is called concussion or mild brain injury. So a small hit to the head can have a really heavy impact, not only for sports people. We see this every day, and I would say that at least from 10 people where we do a brain map, I would say there's 1 out of 10, because we have a statistical test on measures on the brain waves to see if this person's brain is in repair mode, if it got a hit or not. And this test works so precisely, and people don't know because they underestimate the consequences. We had that so often that people got suddenly sleep problems, concentration problems, whatever, mood problems, because they got hit to the head. Oh, but it was not important. I didn't lost conscious. Oh, I was in hospital. They said everything is fine, but that is not true. Yeah, maybe you can come back later to that, because not only about psychological trauma, it's also about physical trauma to the brain.
Absolutely, absolutely, and it's a very important point which you bring up, because in contact sports this is particularly useful. You know, anything that has to do with boxing or any of the martial arts sports, or rugby or American football. And I don't know if you had a chance to see the movie Concussion with Will Smith, and if you haven't, I recommend that you do. And it's the story of an African doctor who was working in the city of Boston, if I'm not mistaken, and started discovering what we know today as CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, which is a specific type of pathology that occurs in football players. And the NFL denied it for a long time, but now they are open about it, and they're doing research to treat it. And brain mapping will help us see the extent of the damage that sports has had on someone's brain. Not only we can intervene early and prevent, but we can also help heal many of the elements of concussion in the human brain, especially the athlete's brain. And other forms of traumatization that athletes can undergo is coaches. And obviously, if you're medical personnel working with an athlete who's been injured, you will also be traumatized yourself. So even though we tend to focus on working with athletes, neurofeedback and biofeedback is useful for anybody who works in sports. You know, broadcasters, cheerleaders, doctors, sports psychologists, the physical therapist. You know, anybody who's in contact with athletes can also benefit from this, because they, after all, they're also part of the performance equation. Next, please. And next, please. So injuries are very common. And when we work with biofeedback and neurofeedback, we're working from a dual model, which is an activation model, meaning we're activating the client to optimize their performance. We increase their arousal to that optimal zone of functioning, and we get them to perform to the best of their abilities. But we're also a resource model, in that if the client's arousal is too high and that's hindering their performance, we want to bring that arousal down a few notches to optimize performance as well. And the activation model and resource model have a bidirectional relationship, and they're interchangeable, meaning there are points in which we can resource the athlete, or there are times in which we're going to need to activate the athlete. Next, please. And this is very, very important, because it goes to the core of what we do. Now, we also work with the Hpa axis, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, which is involved in every single human who stresses out. And in athletes who suffer from great pressure, or great stress or great trauma, this axis is going to be activated and overactive over time. So injuries, even career-ending injuries, are not always physical in their origin. They can be gestating from a long time ago, and they can be related to stress. So if the athlete is not sleeping well, if the athlete is not eating well, if the athlete is not self-regulated, that can be those elements could be the precursors to injury or even worse. Next, please. And those are elements that we can target and influence directly with biofeedback and neurofeedback.
Or you can even stimulate directly the parasympathicus, which is what we do by electricity and magnetic stimulation. There's always several ways.
Yes, there are several ways with state-of-the-art technology that we have available today. So we can even do non-invasive or partially invasive, in that we're not going into the brain or into the body, but we're stimulating areas of the brain that are known to correlate with peak performance. So we can go and stimulate those areas of the brain without going into the brain, without having to, open up the skull and do directly into the brain. And that way we can reach those areas and optimize them. And the good thing about implementing neurofeedback and biofeedback is that we can do it in the lab, or we can take the equipment into the field and we can train the athletes in situ. So we are training directly under the elements, and we can simulate the pressures of competition to do it as realistically as possible, and for the athlete to become familiar with those. So we're conditioning the athlete's mind to perform, either they perform in the real event. And we have several assessments that we can do. One of the ones that I do is the psychophysiological stress profile. Next, please. And the psychophysiological stress profile, it's an assessment where we measure several of the athlete's physiological responses to psychological stress. So we are seeing how the body is reacting to psychological stress. And we can measure the respiration rate, how fast or how slow they're breathing. We can measure muscle tension, how fast or how slowly they're breathing. We can measure the temperature and the sweating of the palm of the hands, which is an indicator of stress or relaxation. And this assessment will provide us with very valuable and a wealth of information as to how the athlete, or how vulnerable the athlete is to stress. So we can assess stress, and we can help the athlete optimize their stress management skills, so when critical moments come, they are prepared to deal with those more effectively. Now, neurofeedback and biofeedback do not guarantee that the athlete is going to win every time, but they guarantee that the athlete is going to be more regular and have more consistency in their performances. So we take an athlete who's consistent in performing poorly, and we can make them consistent at performing better, and we provide them with a better chance at winning. Next, please. And we also do with the stress profile, one of the important things is that we can adapt it. So we can work with Paralympic sports, or we can work with conventional sports. And it's only a 10-minute assessment that, again, might be short in time, but provide us with a wealth of information. It provides us with abundant information on how the athletes react to stress. And again, we can not only do it in the lab, we can also do it in the field, and we can do it under a variety of conditions. The technology allows us to become very creative, and therefore we can come up with ways of testing the athlete and inoculating stress and measuring that stress and training that stress to become favorable to the athlete's performance. And again, we can adapt it to Paralympic sports or conventional sports. Next, please.
Santiago, I see time is flying by. Not but not to shorten, but maybe I will stop asking more questions so that we get, because we have a lot of more things to show and to tell.
Okay, yeah, and we're almost close to the end now. We have the brain mapping QEG, which is quantitative electroencephalography, and this is very useful because again we can assess in the lab. So if this is when I was working with the Ministry of Sports. To the left, we're doing a brain map on an athlete in the lab, and to the right, this is we're doing some measurements in shooting. So this is rifle shooting, and we're measuring brain activity in real time while the athlete is performing. So again,
Wow.
we can take it to the field and we can see what the athlete's brain is doing under certain actions. We can do it at the lab, we can do it in the field. And this is very, very valuable because the technology provides us with that window into the athlete's mind. By looking at the athlete's brain waves, we can see what they're thinking, how they're feeling, whether their performance will be successful or not. For instance, in golf, for putting in golf, you can measure the alpha rhythm, and before the athlete even executes, you can tell whether the putt is going to be successful or not. So we
So,
can look at brain activity before execution, and we can predict whether that execution will be successful or not.
and what is your success rate in the prediction?
Well, successful in putting is that they're going to make the putt. They're going to get it in the hole. And not successful is they're going to miss the hole. It's going to lip out or it's
How
going
good is the success rate? How good is your prediction? Is it 100%? So you
to,
say,
it's about, oh, yeah, I see what you mean. It's about 90% accurate. So it's very, very, very accurate. And there's some published research on that. This is not something I'm making up. This is published research. Martijn Arns in the Netherlands has done a lot of work with golf and has provided research, and 90% accuracy in predicting that with the algorithm.
do the sports people really accept that you can predict the results before even they did it? Do they accept that? Because this is quite.
Uh, yeah, it's quite a different concept, and it's somewhat of a controversial concept. And just like everything, most do, some do not. But fortunately, most athletes and coaches are very interested in what the technology can do, and they're open-minded enough to accept that this is real, that this is science fact and not science fiction. Obviously, you're going to have a small percentage of people who are going to be skeptic, or not open-minded, and that's in every field, clinical world and performance and sports and the arts, you name it. Now, this is for instance an example of a football player that I saw. He was 12 years old at the time I saw him, and the complaint was that there was a lot of anger and impulsiveness. So this was a player who would get very angry in the pitch. Every time he was playing a game and things were not going his way, he would get physically very aggressive. And those lines that you see going up and down in the slide are his brain waves. And this is the brain talking to us. These are electrical impulses. These are the different neurons and brain networks activated in real time. So when we do a brain map, we're looking at brain activity second by second, minute by minute in real time. Now, if we go to the next slide, I want to show you something. Now, the brain waves are going to give us information. And if you look between the 91 and the 92-second mark, something is happening. Mm-hmm. And this is an epileptic discharge. Mind you, this athlete is not epileptic. He never has had a seizure or a convulsion or an absent seizure. But we were able to detect that the source of his aggression was this epileptiform activity. We go to the next one, please.
Impressive.
We can, the purple arrows are showing to the origins. So it's the right frontal side of the brain. The right frontal lobe is responsible for triggering this activity, and it's triggering at areas which are responsible for impulse and aggression control. So what his brain is doing is short-circuiting, and every time he's getting one of these, he's getting very, very, very angry. And this was surprising because neither the athlete nor his mother knew that he had this. They always thought that that it was an educational issue, that he was raised poorly, that maybe he was a brat. And we discovered by looking at his brainwave activity that he had indeed electrical activity, which was short-circuiting in a way, and that's what's causing his aggression and his impulsiveness. If we go to the next one.
Did you measure this in the field or in the lab?
This was measured in the lab. Yeah, it's
Wow.
hard to measure in the field because they're moving and we need specialized equipment that's not quite exists yet. Now, if you look at this slide, you're going to see there are 3 red peaks which are higher, and these are the brain areas where the discharge is taking place. And if you look at the maps below, you're going to see the upper right quadrant. Yeah, thank you. It's lit up in red, and the red shows that's the excess brain activity. So green, it's okay. Red, it's too much. And where it's red, it's coinciding with the areas of the brain. And if you can see, is the right frontal lobe. And these are the ventrolateral prefrontal cortex and the orbital frontal prefrontal cortex, which are areas in charge of controlling aggression and impulsiveness. So every time he has one of those, his brain is going out of whack and he's getting angry. Next, please. And we can also create 2 and 3D images. So we can be very specific. If you're an athlete or a coach or a sports psychologist, this is state-of-the-art assessment. And if you look at the upper right corner, we have a Loretta image, and it has some red stains. The red stains are showing the networks of the brain inside the brain that are being affected by the electrical discharge, by the epileptic discharge. And those are the areas of the brain that are shutting down and are not allowing him to control his anger and his impulsiveness.
Maybe I add something, because we work with Loretta every day. We even do our trainings in Loretta, and this is not, there has not been a scan or a PET scan or whatever done on the client. This is only measured with EEG, so 20 electrodes on the head, and you can localize the source. So it's not costing a lot, it goes fast, and it's precise. And yeah.
And the most important thing is non-invasive. We're not administering current or electricity or anything into the brain. The cap picks it up, puts it into the amplifier, and we can see it into the screen. If you look down, you can see the 3D image of the S Loretta. So this is the 3D image that you can actually rotate on the software, and the yellow and the red dot is showing the exact area of the brain that's compromised because of this. So what we're doing is not only we're discovering why the athlete is being so aggressive, we're finding the precise region or regions of the brain that are the source or the generator of this activity, and that allows us to target those areas specifically. So we're individualizing the diagnosis, for lack of a better word, and we're individualizing the training to this athlete. Neurofeedback allows us to individualize the intervention. It's not the same for everybody. We're all unique, and we train that uniqueness. Next, please. Now, this is another example of a tennis player. And this is a very interesting case because this is an elite tennis player who I was watching play one day. I went with him to his practice, to his training, and I was noticed that every time the other player would hit a slice, that means the ball spins in a certain way, every time he returned the ball, he would hit the net. So he was very successful in returning slices. For some reason, 8 to 9 out of 10 times he was hitting the net. So I decided to do a brain map to see what the problem was. And if we go to the next one, please, we're going to see very interesting information. So he has beta spindles, which is fast brainwaves, which cause anxiety and impulsiveness. So he's not thinking the play through. He's just hitting the ball back, and he's not thinking it through. We also have mu. Mu brainwaves are good because they correlate with peak performance. So this is an athlete who's making mu brainwaves, and that favors his performance. However, we also have excess alpha and theta brainwaves, which are spatial rotation. So the problem was that he was not seeing the ball spinning. Visually, he was not able to see the spin of the ball because his brain was not processing it, meaning that he was hitting the ball when he was counter hitting a slice and he was hitting the net. Every time he hit the net is because he visually was not seeing the spinning of the ball. We would have never been able to assert that without a brain map, because the brain is showing us what brain waves are present and in what areas of the brain they're prevalent and in what regions of the brain they're also relevant to the intervention. So we were able to see the athlete's brain activity, and we did some recordings in the field, some recordings in the lab, and the brainwave activity was basically the same, was essentially the same. The same pattern when he was imagining the ball, and the same brainwave pattern when he was seeing it in real time. Next, please. And we again we can also see the brain images. So the purple on the right area of the brain where Francois is pointing is the region of the brain that's compromised. And that's the region of the brain that has to do with rotating objects. So he was not seeing the ball spinning and turning because that area of the brain is not processing that effectively. Next, please. And then we can also see it in 3D maps. So the areas of the brain that are lit up in red are showing us the region of the brain that is compromised. Again, we can go to that region of the brain and target those brain waves and those networks to optimize his performance. So if you see, as you can see, brain mapping is a very, very powerful technique because it helps us discover things that it helps us confirm things that you probably thought about your performance, or it helps us discover things that you did not know were happening in your mind and your brain, and gives us a more profound, a deeper window into how we can optimize psychological performance for athletes.
Okay. I also see a question, and this is good because we are now, because this first part is more about finding out what's going on in the brain of the athlete. But what do we do? Because this is also the question. Yeah, what can you do? And I think the important part, people don't understand that the neurofeedback, biofeedback, the first part is always an assessment, but the sexy part is the intervention. You can everything which can be measured can be changed, or almost. So go ahead.
Yeah. Now, as you're saying, yes, the assessment is really important because we need a starting point and we need specific information. The more information we can gather, the better. Now, I'm not saying that you should not do traditional sports psychology. That's very important. You need to go watch the athlete. You need to interview the athlete. Maybe some psychometric testing is useful, but there are things that we're not going to be able to see, as we saw in these two cases, just by observation or assessment alone. We need to look at that. And because we have the technology, why not? So one of the ways we can intervene is with heart rate variability biofeedback. Again, a very common intervention and widely researched. And
low cost.
And low cost is it's low cost and cost efficient. Same as a brain map. A brain map is not tremendously expensive if you compare it to an MRI or a CAT scan. And in many ways, it provides more information than the former two. The QEEG brain mapping will provide a wealth of information. And again, we can record in the lab, we can record in the field. Now, heart rate variability is all about heart and brain interactions. So by optimizing heart rhythmicity, we can optimize brain performance. By teaching proper breathing techniques, we can help the heart and the brain communicate better. And that optimizes performance. It brings more blood flow into the brain, which optimizes what we know as perfusion. And if perfusion or blood flow is optimized, then we're optimizing performance. It helps regulate anxiety. It helps reduce anxiety. It helps reduce and optimize and manage stress a lot better. Next, please. Now, We can do it several ways, and I don't want to stop too much here because we want to emphasize other points. But you can influence the limbic system, you can influence your hippocampus, you can influence your cortex, you can influence your frontal lobes, which are areas important for self-regulation, but they're also important for sports performance. And we can enhance them by doing heart rate variability biofeedback. So the entry point into the mind is through the heart. And when we optimize heart rhythmicity, we optimize brain performance. Next, please. And these are examples of what the software can show us. So these are the graphs, and we learn how to interpret those graphs. Next, please. I wanna drive into the ones that show the point, to get the point across. Next, please. So these are images in which we can measure the EEG and the heart rate activity at the same time. And when we train, we can see the changes. Next, please. Okay, so here we have, let's do one more and see. We have the other set. Okay, let's go back 2 slices, please. 2 slides, sorry. One more, please. Okay, we have here an image of mu rhythm. This is mu rhythm in an athlete who had an injury, and it was very traumatic for him because it was almost career ending. The peak, the yellow peak shows the mu, and the higher the peak, the worse it is. And the red dot shows the intensity of the mu. The more, the worse. So the more red you see, or the higher the yellow peak, the worse. If we go to the next slide, what we did, we had the athlete do some breathing, and I had him doing specific breathing technique while I was recording his EEG, his brain activity, and his EKG, his heart activity at the same time. And if you notice how after a few seconds of breathing, the mu starts disappearing. Look at the yellow peak and look at the red dot. If you go to the, let's go to the one before, please, to see the before and after. So notice the peak and notice the red coloration on the topography. A lot of mu. And then if we go to the next one, please, after breathing for a few seconds, you can see a reduction in brain activity. And that means optimization in brain activity. So we know it works because we have the technology to measure it. We're measuring brain activity while we're doing breathing activity at the same time. And the brain activity changes. We can see it on the EEG. We can see it on the color maps. We know it's working. Next, please. Now, the next one shows an athlete with a sleep disorder. Sleep disorders in athletes, or sleep dysregulation in athletes, is more common than you think. Encircled in the red, it's what we call a sharp vertex wave. And if you have a sharp vertex wave before 500 seconds, so it occurs about 434 seconds. If we have that type of activity before 500 seconds, we know we have a sleep disorder. We don't know what kind of sleep disorder it is, because to do that, we need to do a sleep study, but we know that. And the green arrows point to activity that shows stage 2 sleep, meaning the athlete is falling asleep when they're not supposed to.
That was during the day in the lab.
And this is during the day. This is not at night. Okay, this is an eyes closed recording, and this is during the day. And the brain is doing things that it's not supposed to do, and it's showing us that the athlete is struggling with sleep. And this is the brain of a professional golfer, by the way. So a professional golfer with a sleep disorder. And
in our experience is that sleep disorder is the most common complaint why people come up to us. This is even by not sports people.
Yeah, and this goes to show that you wouldn't think that athletes would have problem with sleep, and it's, you know, they take place more often than we'd like to accept or imagine. So athletes do get sleep disorders. The brain map will show us what the tendency is and what we can do to help. Next, please. So we can also see heart activity and brain activity during sleep disorders, and we can optimize it. So the technology, again, allows us to see non-invasively at a very cost-efficient in a very cost-efficient manner. Next, please. Now, we have some videos that we're not going to be able to show, but this is a slide of heart rate variability training with a hammer thrower, and this is in the field. I don't know if you can see the reflection. There's two reflections. One is me holding my cell phone, filming the screen, and the one where Francois is pointing to is the coach. So this is a young girl who's a hammer thrower, and we're doing some heart rate variability before she goes into the pit. In the next slide, she's going to go into the pit, and she's going to perform. So we're teaching her some breathing techniques. She's going to go into the pit. She's going to apply those techniques, and she's going to execute. And as an anecdotal experience, when we were doing the training this day, she broke her own record. So she was able to launch the hammer about 10 meters longer than she had previously done it. Now, I cannot say for certain that it was the HRV because we would have to do more repeated measures, but it probably very strongly had something to do with it, had some influence in it. Next, please. Now, if I'll put my contact information at the end, and if you want to see the videos, I'll be happy to show them to you more when you talk to me via email. We can also do electromyography, and this is good for injuries. We're working with muscle activity, and the good thing about neurofeedback and biofeedback, which I didn't mention before, but I want to mention now, is that it allows you to work in an interdisciplinary manner. You can work with physical therapy, you can work with biomechanics, you can work with physiology, you can work with medicine, you can work with nutrition. So biofeedback and neurofeedback are not exclusive to sports psychology. They can be used in conjunction with nutrition, with physical therapy for injury rehab, for biomechanics, for optimal performance execution, for physiology to optimize physiological performance, and so on and so forth. And that should be the object of this. That is not exclusive to sports psychology, that it should be used in conjunction with any of those. Now, if we go to the next one, again, the video is supposed to show it, but this is some work I did in Guatemala. Sorry, Francois, were you going to say something?
No, just sorry to not be able to show the video, but we had several ways to include the video, and it didn't work out. So
right. But we can find ways of sharing with people later on. Now, this is some work I did in Guatemala, and this is not in the sports psychology lab. This is in the physical therapy lab, and this is a javelin thrower. When they throw the spear, and we were working on a specific injury that he had. If you see on his leg, on his right leg, sorry, his left leg, we have placed a few electrodes, and those sites were chosen by the physical therapist. It is the physical therapist who will choose the muscles that we need to work. And so we're doing some live recording. If we go to the next slide, please. You'll see that we are doing some live feedback. So we put a big screen and we explain the exercises, and we are having him do some specific work with his muscles. And in the left picture, you can see the physical therapist with me, and we're making sure everything's fine. I'm explaining to the athlete what he's supposed to do. And notice how there are no cables running from the athlete to the computer because everything is on wirelessly. The technology is Bluetooth, so it allows us to have a brain or body-computer interface that is wireless. That makes the work a lot easier. And we're doing live work, and you have on the right picture we have some of the psychologists, the medicine, the medical staff. We have the coach in the blue looking at what we're doing. So again, we can work interdisciplinarily, more multidisciplinarily. Next, please. And this is some work we're doing with weightlifting, and we're looking at muscle asymmetries or imbalances with weightlifting. Again, we have somebody who's specialized in choosing the muscles, they're placing the muscles. Next, please. And then we go into the execution. So we have the athlete execute, and we measure the activity via Bluetooth on the computer. The data can be recorded The data can be graphed. Data can be used in many ways. So this technology provides us with the possibility to use endless forms of intervention. And if you notice, we're not doing it in the lab. We went to the gym where this athlete trains. You can see the amplifier is it's strapped to the back, which is not interfering with his performance. And then we are measuring. Next, please. And again, we had a couple of videos. This is something we're doing in the biomechanics lab. This is a Paralympic weightlifter who is a bronze medalist. So he's the third best weightlifter in the world in the Paralympics. And we're placing some sensors. And what we're doing here is biomechanics is looking at motor execution in terms of the actual performance. So they're doing video analysis. Physiology is looking at with a dynamometer, they're looking at strength and power. And with electromyography, we're looking at asymmetries. So they want to see whether there are muscle asymmetries between the left and right arm that could affect the way in which the bar is lifted, whether it's tilted or too straight, because that's going to affect performance. So we have 3 different sports science modalities working at once with the athlete. Next, please. And again, everything is done wirelessly. This is some of the work I did last year in Bolivia. On the right is the sports psychologist with the computer. To the left, we have the athlete. And we are doing muscle work in penalty kicks. So we had some football players do some penalty kicks, and we're measuring muscle activity, and we're measuring respiration rate, and we're measuring heart rate. So we're taking this to the field. And again, notice how there are no cables running from the athlete onto the computer that the sports psychologist is holding. Everything is done wirelessly. And so we can collect data that we can feed back to the coach, we can feed back to the athlete, and we can use that data to train more effectively. Next, please. So this is one of the videos that we couldn't show. Let's go to the other one. But I'll share links to my YouTube channel, which you can visit, and several YouTube links. Next, please. This is the other video. And we can use peripheral temperature as another way of doing biofeedback. Is good for several things. In sports psychology, peripheral temperature is good for the training of the mind-body connection. So this is where we train the athlete to become mentally strong. When temperature drops, they're stressed out. When temperature increases and they get warmer, they're more relaxed. And we can teach them how to be more relaxed under pressure. Next, please. And let's go to the next one. I want to show the picture. Yeah, this is one thing we're doing. This is a Paralympic tennis player, female Paralympic tennis player. So she plays tennis while using a wheelchair, which is rather remarkable. And wow. If you see on the left picture, she's holding a glass of, she's holding ice. So what I had her do was to hold the ice for a couple of seconds, for about a minute, and then I would ask her to increase her temperature. So I would train her in psychological techniques so she could increase her temperature, meaning your hand is cold, you are stressed out, I want you to relax, raise your heart temperature, and then become more aware of what's happening. And on the right, you can see the graph going up, which means she was able to do so. She had achieved such mental mastery that she was able to hold the ice, which is very, very cold, and then warm up her hand in 1 or 2 minutes.
So you mean this could be the end of the cold feet and fingers for ladies who always have cold feet, no?
Yes, yeah, figuratively and and you know, and relatively. Yes, meaning athletes will get cold and hand feet, and that means they're anxious. And biofeedback, peripheral temperature biofeedback, will be able to literally train those skills. One of the best ways to do it is holding the ice. That's a very, very good form of training. And the fact that she was able to do it in under a minute or under 2 minutes shows the level of mastery she's acquired. And this can be done with any athlete, you know, Paralympic or conventional, any age, any discipline. We just adapt it to the athlete's particular needs. Let's go to the next one, please. Now we have skin conductance, which is the sweating response. So when your hands get sweaty, we've probably all been there. We have a big performance coming up and our hands get sweaty. That means we're anxious. And we do the same thing. Galvanic skin response, it's also a modality to optimize mental strength, meaning you can perform well under pressure. If you can bring your sweating response down, and if you can increase your temperature, you are in the zone and you're going to perform a lot better. Next, please. Now we also have brain connections to the sweat glands. So there are specific brain regions that are engaged, and we can train those with neurofeedback as well. Next, please. And then we go into neurofeedback. So I'm not going to spend too much time here, and I want to open the door for questions because I can show you what websites you can visit to see neurofeedback videos and how they work. But essentially, neurofeedback is training brain waves. Okay, we teach the athlete how to make more or less of specific brain waves. And they can do it by playing a video game. They can do it by manipulating a movie or a screen. But what they're using to manipulate the screen is their brain. They're not using the keyboard. They're not using the mouse. They're not using a joystick. All they're doing is using the brain wave activity. And so the brain becomes a remote control to manipulate this electric activity, which is going to enhance performance. Whether you want more focus, whether you want better sleep, whether you want to reduce anxiety, whether you want to increase arousal, you can do it by training your brain waves. Next, please. And it uses a brain-computer interface, meaning the athlete is looking at a screen, and if you notice at the top of the head, she has a red electrode. I don't know if you can please point to it, Francois. Thank you. Yeah. So there's an electrode there, which means we're training that brain region specifically. And what she's doing, she's playing the Pac-Man with her brain. She's not using the keyboard or the mouse or anything else. And if the Pac-Man keeps moving, it means the brain is going in the direction in which we want it to go. She's making frequencies or those brain waves that are performance enhancing. If the Pac-Man stops and the ghosts eat the Pac-Man, it means her brain is going in the wrong direction. She's getting anxious, she's losing focus, she's not in the zone anymore. And by repeating this, we can create new wiring and new patterns in the brain that are conducive to peak performance. This requires a few repetitions, but again, it's non-invasive, it's not expensive, and it's highly cost-effective. And as we have seen, we have top athletes around the world using it, incorporating this into their training techniques. Next one, please. And this is what the professional would see. We see a screen with graphs, and what we're seeing here is the athlete's brain activity in real time. And based on what that brainwave activity is doing moment to moment, we make the adjustments necessary to either increase or decrease certain frequencies. And when we increase or decrease those frequencies, what we're doing is we're directing the brain to act in a certain way, which is going to help at a certain moment. So it's not the same when you're putting in golf to doing a penalty kick or doing a free throw or serving in tennis, you know. But we can see what's happening in any of those specific moments. We can see the specific brainwaves related to those specific moments, and then we can come up with training protocols for that we can do in the lab and then in the field. Next one, please.
That's it.
So with that,
that's it. We got at the end. As there are your coordinates, your contact details, they will come up.
Okay, great. So I would like to open the.
Now, no,
No,
before that, I would like to make the offer, because the idea of, oh, it doesn't come up. I don't, okay. Then I make the offer manually, because apparently I have a problem to load the file, show the last slide. The idea of doing this webinar was to hopefully start new activity and common project. You're located in Colombia, but you're but you're often coming to Europe for giving conferences, talks. And what we would like to offer is that we can do a common evaluation of athlete's brain, and you get the expertise of Santiago. As you saw, I think he's quite experienced. We are also experienced. We scanned over 1,300 brains. Not so many sports, but we are quite good with analyzing this the brain activity. The other way is, if people are interested in what I don't know, a sports federation or an institute could be interested to having Santiago come over or doing a workshop, something else. We are really interested in helping and in facilitating that. There are some different approaches, like Santiago works than we work. We are more using stimulation, also things. We are using different approaches, but you get the same results. So in your email, you will get, after the webinar tomorrow or after tomorrow, there will be the contact details from Santiago, our contact details. And so if you have any ideas, projects, crazy ideas, we prefer them, please come up with. I have already been contacted from people from Luxembourg who want to open something like a mind room. So yeah, let's go on and have a discussion. But now I think it's time, because we took a little bit more time, but your intervention was fantastic. I think it was really worth. So we have a first question here coming from Alexander Merej, which we know because he was even in our practice, and he is studying sports psychology and sports performance in Paris. Is that right, Alexandra? So the question is, do we work separately on cognitive versus physiological stress? Because the cause effect of activation is higher when cognitive anxiety and physiological activation are present together. However, physiological activation on its own is beneficial for performance. Did you get that? Can you answer to that, Santiago?
yes, that the answer to that is that you can do it different ways. You can work on the cognition with the sports psychology separately, and you can work with the physiology separately, but you can integrate them. And what I often do and I recommend based on my experience is that they are used both ways. One, that you work them separately, and two, that you integrate them within the same session. Um, and again, you can do this in the lab and you can do this at the field. How you do it, well, it's up to the particular skill set and the particular style of every professional. What the technology does is provide us with ways of seeing the info in real time, making the adjustments in real time, and also allows us to be very creative. Most of the amplifiers have software that will allow you to create your own protocols. So there's no need. You can use the protocols that already exist, but if you want to create your own protocol, by all means do it, because the technology allows you to do so. Again, integrate physiology and cognition and use them separately. There are moments in which training them separately is going to be more important than others. that EEG sent to a neurologist, even though I know that's epileptiform activity. I'm a psychologist. I'm not licensed to diagnose anything.
The
So
medical
it's important.
is important. Yeah.
Yes. So I sent it to a neurologist who confirmed on it. And for the intervention, I did the neurofeedback part myself. So we designed a protocol. An anticonvulsant was prescribed, which was then later removed. And I had a psychologist who I worked with, not in my practice, but somewhere else. And she was in charge of doing the anger management training. And sometimes the psychologist and I would be in the same place, and we would create protocols which would involve brainwave activity and anger management techniques. So again, they were worked separately at times, and they were worked parallel to each other, and they were used at the same time. Now, it's important in cases like this that you also involve medical staff, and a neurologist is quite important because, again, as a psychologist, I don't have licensure, and it's beyond the scope of my practice to diagnose anything.
Yeah.
But it's multidisciplinary work. Those who know me and have followed me for the last few years know that I'm big into integrative interventions. And I seldom use neurofeedback or biofeedback alone. I also include neuropsychology or psychotherapy or functional medicine. And I think the more that you can provide the person with, the better.
Okay, great. So next question comes from Luis Pulgar. I have a question for Santiago. Do you have experience working with athletes suffering from sleep deprivation? It is a common state during the end of competition.
I do. And as I said before, sleep disorders in athletes are quite common. And they are common because athletes who compete internationally have to travel to different time zones. And they have to deal with lengthy training schedules. They have to deal with lengthy air travel. They have to deal with jet lag. And they have to deal with multiple schedules. And so, again, it's all about integration. My specialty is the neurofeedback. And when I do the QEEG, I determine what the brainwave activity that needs to be corrected, it's corrected. But the intervention will come sometimes from a pharmacological perspective. It's some kind of medication that's needed. Often we try to do supplements as opposed to medication, traditional medication. Sleep hygiene is quite important. Teaching the athletes a proper sleep and waking up schedule is quite crucial to it as well. I don't think that sleep deprivation, it's a phenomena that it's independent from any athlete. I think most athletes that I see suffer sleep dysregulation in varying degrees. And that needs to be taken into account when you do the intervention, and also when you do the assessment, and when it's time to do the intervention.
Yeah. Okay. Another question from Saskia. How many overlap is there between the breathing technique interventions and the yoga practice, which includes also breathing techniques? Maybe put different, do athletes also get advised offered to do yoga? Maybe I add this sentence. I would to this question. I think the major difference between doing biofeedback breathing, HRV breathing, and yoga or other techniques is the measuring part. Because you can, it's only when you measure that you can really be sure that you are, I think, on the right track. Do you agree, or do you have another point of view on that, Santiago?
Yeah, I think that there's overlap, and like you're saying, measuring is very important. HRV biofeedback will target specific brain regions and have specific physiological changes. That's not to say that yoga and meditation are important. They're very important too. And when somebody asks me if they can do yoga or meditation, I welcome that. The difference is that the kind of physiological responding and the kind of areas of the brain and body that are going to be activated and optimized are different. But then again, the more you can provide an athlete with, the better. And I don't see yoga meditation being antagonistic to HRV biofeedback. If anything, they strengthen and they reinforce what we can do with HRV biofeedback. I see HRV biofeedback as important to teach the person how to properly breathe. So when they learn any kind of specific breathing technique, be with yoga or meditation, it's easier for them to learn it and apply it.
Okay, thank you. Then you have a question from Gabriela. At what point in sports periodization will neurofeedback be incorporated? This one is for you.
It can be incorporated at any time. And I tend to use it at any point of the periodization, like she's asking. It could be pre-competitive phase, the competitive phase, the post-competitive phase. Usually it's recommended that you introduce the athlete to it during the pre-season. Sometimes it's a little hard to introduce it during competition because it takes time to get used to it. And unfortunately, I've heard stories of sports psychologists who tried to do HRV biofeedback for the first time before an important competition, and the athlete gets so relaxed that they go and perform poorly, and the athlete doesn't want to have to do anything with sports psychology or biofeedback. So I would suggest the preseason is the best point to do it, or the off season. If you are going to incorporate it during the competitive stage, I would suggest do it before practices. Never do it before competitions, because then if the athlete is novice and they don't understand what they're doing, it could create problems. Yeah. But in general terms, you can implement it anytime you want, really.
I think that the point is you work on a system, and when you try to introduce better self-regulation, that means clearly that also there can be first form of little instability before getting into a better form of self-regulation. So yeah,
absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, then from Aracel Grain, I'm interested in this group. Maybe you're talking about the idea of having a mind room here in Luxembourg. Yes, please contact us. We are also interested in getting in touch with you. Then you have a message in Spanish, and my Spanish is not as good enough. It's muchos gracias por la presentación, Dr. Santiago. Donc, you have a fan. Alexander says thank you. And then Saskia, is there some insight on what is the order of body-mind reactions regarding breathing, brain activity, heart rate, muscle tension, body responses, sweating, etc.? What comes first? What reactions follows? Ooh, this could be a long answer, but make it short, Santiago.
Yeah, it's a very interesting question, and the short version of that is that it depends. It changes from individual to individual. We're all different. Normally the first what I notice response the quicker and the most is the temperature, body temperature, as well as heart rate variability. Now, if we're measuring the EEG at the same time, we're able to see whether EEG changes first or later. But it's impossible to say in general terms. You have to assess the individual, and you will see that even though, for instance, you take a football team and you take 20 players, not all 20 players are going to respond in the same way, and the sequence in which their physiological responses, the physiological modalities respond, it's different. So it's a very individual process. And the only way you can know is by doing the assessment using the, any kind of amplifier that you have to measure.
Yeah. Always measure, then you can act. Okay, great presentation, Santiago. I'm sure all of us can learn a lot from you, from Claudio. Thank you so much, Santiago and Francois. Excellent presentation. Welcome. Thank you. Thank you for your feedback, because we need feedback to continue organize such things. I just want to repeat what we our joint offer between Santiago and Neurofeedback Luxembourg is we offer you for the same price that two experts of brain look at your brain. Normally a brain map is around €300. So we are willing to contact us. We're willing to offer for the same price, not only one view, but two views of experts looking at your brain, because HIV is good, yeah, but brain mapping is, I think, quite more powerful, but that's an opinion, yeah. The presentation will also be made available for replay. We will share our contact details. Don't hesitate to like our Facebook page. Also, Santiago has a Facebook page. And yeah, stay in touch. And I enjoyed really. I learned also some things. I hope you enjoyed it too, Santiago.
Yes, I did. I just thank you again for the invitation. I had a great time. This is always fun. I just want to briefly mention, I know you will send this, but for those of you who are interested in getting in touch with me, my Instagram is Neuro Santiago, Neuro Santiago, and you can reach me there, Instagram. And also my YouTube channel is Santiago Brand, my first and last name. So if you go to YouTube and search for Santiago Brand, you'll find my channel. There are tons of videos in English and Spanish about brain mapping and neurofeedback and my work with sports. So you can subscribe to the channel, get notifications of when I add new videos. And again, if you're interested, like Francois said, get the two of us to look at your brain map for the price of one. It's a very good offer. And I thank you for the invitation. Thank you for all of those who attended, and we hope to talk to you in the future.
Yeah, and I hope that we find a project that you come over to Europe and stay a little bit here, because I think there are enough athletes who could need your help, and yeah, I would be happy to do that with you together.
Well, yeah, I would love
to. Thanks for following us. We took a little bit longer, but I think the topic was worth. I hope so. And yeah, see you soon. The next topic we will do is webinar will be about cognitive and age decline brain and what you can do to stop that. So it will be in September, and we will also repeat our ADHD webinar, this time in English. So thank you for staying here, and I wish you yeah, a good evening, and see you soon. Bye. Thank you for being here.
Bye. Thank you.